She buried her Amish husband last year. What she did next shocked everyone. The casseroles were still on the counter, his boots were still by the door, and I was standing in the middle of a Walmart I had never been inside before, holding a phone I didn't know how to use, looking at a map of a world I had been told my whole life was dangerous. I was 34 years old. I had never been alone in a store before, not once, not in my entire life, and I remember standing there under those fluorescent lights in my black morning dress, with my hands shaking, thinking, this is the most ordinary place in the world, and I have never felt so afraid of anything. Before I tell you how I got there, before I tell you what I did in that store that changed everything, let me say this. My name is Hannah. I grew up Old Order Amish in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. This channel is where I finally say the things I was never allowed to say, stories from behind the prayer cap that nobody else will tell you. If you want to hear them, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. Because what I'm about to tell you, I have never said in this order before. Daniel was a good man. I want to start there because the truth of this story depends on you understanding that first. He was not cruel. He was not cold. He was the kind of man who checked on the animals twice before bed, who never sat down to eat before the children were seated, who could fix anything with his hands and never once asked to be thanked for it. He was steady the way old farmland is steady. Not exciting, not surprising, but reliable in a way that becomes the whole shape of your world without you ever noticing it happening. We married when I was 21. He was 28. It was a good match by every measure our community used, and I knew it. And I was grateful for it in the way you are grateful for a warm house in winter. Not joyfully exactly, but genuinely, in your bones. Our life together had a texture I can still feel when I close my eyes. The sound of the barn before sunrise, the weight of a cast iron pan, the smell of kerosene and wood moat, and the particular quiet that falls over a farm in January, when the snow is thick and the world outside stops existing. I loved that life. I want to be honest about that too. But underneath it, so far underneath that, I had no name for it for years. There was a woman who had questions she was never allowed to ask, who had dreams she had learned very early, to have only in the dark and only in silence. Daniel never told me not to think. He never needed to. The structure did it for him. Every hour had its purpose. Every purpose had its place. And somewhere in the 12 years we built together, the woman with the questions learned to live so quietly inside me that sometimes I forgot she was there at all. But she was always there. That is the thing I need you to understand before the rest of this story makes any sense. She was always there. He died on a Tuesday in February, a heart attack in the milking barn at 4:30 in the morning. He went out before sunrise the way he always did, and when he didn't come back for breakfast, our oldest son went looking. I am not going to describe what came next in any detail because some things belong only to the people who lived them. What I will tell you is this. I loved Daniel, and when I understood that he was gone, something broke inside me that I will carry for the rest of my life. Grief is not simple. I did not know that then the way I know it now. I thought grief was one thing, a wave, a weight, a color. I did not know it could be layered, that it could hold more than one truth at once without either truth cancelling the other out. The Amish funeral happened fast, the way it always does. His brothers built the coffin from plain pine in our barn while I made coffee for the men who came to help. There were no flowers. There was no embalming. The viewing happened in our home, his coffin in the front room where we had eaten supper together 2 nights before. Hundreds of people came through. I shook every hand. I accepted every casserole. I sat through the 3-hour service on a hard wooden bench, and I sang the hymns I had sung every other Sunday of my life. And underneath all of it, quiet and persistent as a second heartbeat, I felt something I did not have a word for yet. It was not happiness. Please understand that. It was something more frightening than happiness. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of a field you have never been allowed to walk into, and realizing for the first time that the gate is open, and that no one is watching, and that you are the only one who gets to decide whether you walk through. On the 4th morning after we buried him, before the sun came up, before my mother-in-law was awake in the spare room where she had been sleeping since the night Daniel died, I got up and I walked out to the woodshed, bare feet, frozen grass, black morning dress. In the back corner of that woodshed, behind the kindling box and an old harness Daniel had been meaning to fix for 2 years, there was a wooden crate. Inside the crate, wrapped in an oilcloth I had taken from the buggy shop the year I turned 22, was a notebook, a plain black composition notebook, the kind English schoolchildren use. I had bought it at a gas station 13 years earlier, on the one trip Daniel and I took to visit his cousins in Ohio, while he was inside paying for fuel. I had hidden it in that crate the day we got home, and I had written in it once a week, every week, for 13 years, by candlelight, after Daniel was asleep. He never knew it existed. Inside that notebook was everything I had not been allowed to be. Every question about scripture I was not permitted to ask out loud. Every book I had heard about from English neighbors and quietly, desperately, wanted to read. The name of every place I had wanted to see. The ocean, a library, just any library, where I could walk in and take something off a shelf without anyone asking me why. I sat down on an overturned bucket in the cold woodshed, and I read all of it, every single page, 13 years of my own hidden voice, and I cried. But not the way I had cried for Daniel. I cried the way you cry when you find someone who has been lost for a very long time, and you realize she was alive the whole time, just waiting. Then I took that notebook into the kitchen, sat down at the table where I had served 3 meals a day for 13 years, and on a fresh page, with a pencil I sharpened with a paring knife, I wrote 3 sentences. I am leaving the Amish. I am taking the children with me if they will come. I am going to find out who I would have been. Leaving was not clean. I am not going to tell you it was. 3 of my 5 children came with me. 2 stayed. The 2 who stayed are grown now, and they write to me in letters I read so carefully. I have memorized the shape of their handwriting. The shunning was immediate and total. My mother has not spoken to me. My father sent 1 letter, 3 sentences, telling me he loved me and could not see me again until I came back to the church. I keep it in the drawer of my nightstand. I read it on the hard nights. I want to tell you about my friend Rebecca, because her story is the reason I had the courage to do any of this. Rebecca was widowed at 29. Her husband died in a buggy accident on Route 340. She wore the black for the full year, exactly as she was supposed to. Then she wore dark grey because her mother-in-law said it was too soon to change. Then dark blue. Then her oldest son married and his wife moved in. And Rebecca, who had never lived alone for a single day of her life, found herself 34 years old and quietly invisible in a home that had once been hers. She told me once, at a quilting bee, in a voice so low I almost missed it, that she sometimes wondered if she had actually died in that accident with her husband, and just didn't know it yet. I never forgot that. In therapy, and yes, I have a therapist now, and she is one of the most important people in my life. I learned that what I felt in those days between Daniel's death and the morning I walked to the woodshed has a name. It is called the grief of the unlived life. It is what happens when someone you genuinely loved dies, and in the silence after, you finally hear the woman you were never allowed to become, and she has been knocking on the inside of your chest for years. If you grew up somewhere that handed you a role before you were old enough to choose one, if you have ever loved someone and also, in a part of yourself you were ashamed of, quietly longed for the day that role would end, I need you to hear this. You are not a monster. You are a person who was given too small a life and too large a soul. Those two things will press against each other until one of them breaks, and it does not have to be the soul. My therapist told me something during our 6th session that I carry with me every day. She said grief and freedom are not opposites, they live in the same room. You can love someone completely and still feel relief that the version of yourself you had to be for them is finally allowed to rest. That does not make the love less real. It makes you a whole human being, instead of a performance of one. I still wear black sometimes, not because anyone is making me, because I did love him, and grief deserves its own clothes on certain days. But I also wear blue now, and green, and one bright yellow sweater my daughter bought me for my 35th birthday that made my mother-in-law stop speaking to me for a full month, right before she stopped speaking to me altogether. The woman I found in that woodshed, on that frozen morning, in that black composition notebook, she did not run when I finally let her out. She just stood up slowly. The way you stand after sitting too long in one position, and she walked into the kitchen, and she started writing the rest of her life. If this story reached somewhere inside you, please tell me in the comments what part stayed with you. I read every single one, and if you want to hear more truths from behind the prayer cap, subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss what comes next. There is so much more I am finally ready to say. The woman you were before they handed you the role is still in there. She has been keeping herself alive in the dark for years, and she only needs one thing from you. Open the door.